The Yu-Gi-Oh card game constantly gets a bad rep for being one of those TCGs that's unkind to new players. This notion usually comes from aspects of the game such as the difficulty of comprehending its weird rulings, the overwhelming feeling of learning the numerous ways to special summon monsters, or the overall intimidating nature of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! The point is, if you've never played Yu-Gi-Oh! Or haven't played in many years, getting back into it can sometimes feel borderline impossible. But that's where I come in. Hi, I'm Topsy and welcome to the channel. For today's video, we'll be focusing on the various ways to special summon monsters, more specifically, the XYZ summon. But before we get started though, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and consider subscribing. It's easy, free, and helps creators such as myself tremendously. But with that out of the way, let's get started. XYZ monsters hands down single-handedly revolutionized the extra deck. The XYZ mechanic is renowned as one of the best and most generic special summoning mechanics to be ever released in the Yu-Gi-Oh card game, and it's easy to see why. However, even though this mechanic was so strong and versatile, it did take it a little while for XYZ monsters to truly make a splash on the format, unlike Synchro monsters who had a huge impact almost immediately. But once their true potential was discovered, the way Yu-Gi-Oh would be played would drastically change forever. Essentially, every deck in the game, irregardless of what they were playing, more likely than not, had some form of XYZ monster they could make to deal with whatever board state that was present. So much so that instead of decks main decking cards like Mystical Space Typhoon to deal with pesky back row, they would instead opt to play cards like Tornado Dragon or Diamond Direwolf to deal with such cards. Not to say that this made main deck answers obsolete, but just that XYZ monsters were a lot more reliable to deal with such cards. This eventually gave rise to concepts like the Rank 4 toolbox and solidified it as the best level for monsters to be. With that being said, it's hard to undermine just how much of an incredible impact these cards have made on the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. But with that short backstory out of the way, let's get into explaining what exactly XYZ monsters are and how to summon them. Part 1. The basics of the XYZ summon. So, what should you know when it comes to XYZ monsters? Well, first off, XYZ monsters are a special type of monster that resides in a player's extra deck. This means, since it's an extra deck mechanic, these monsters can't just be normal summoned, and instead you have to opt to special summon them via their own special mechanic. Secondly, a proper XYZ summon can only be performed during one of your main phases. Additionally, these type of summons are also treated like a built-in summon, also referred to as an inherent summon. Third, the process of XYZ summoning is performed by stacking 2 or more monsters of the same level that match the rank of the XYZ monster you're planning on summoning. In case you're unfamiliar, a rank refers to an XYZ monster's inverted level. That's it. Fourth, when performing an XYZ summon, the monsters used for that summon do not go to the graveyard. No, instead they stay on field underneath the XYZ monster. Kinda. These are treated as overlay units. More on this later. Lastly, what can and can't be used for an XYZ summon? XYZ summons can only be done with face-up monsters you control. This is unlike fusions and rituals, which are able to use face-up and face-down monsters as well as cards in hand. In addition to needing face-up monsters, those monsters used must also have levels. Also, those cards used must also be physical monsters on field. What I mean by this is that you'll be able to use your regular main deck monsters, monsters from the extra deck that have levels, and even trap monsters. But you won't be able to use tokens because they don't actually have a physical form. I did say the monsters used do need to have levels, but there are times when XYZ monsters can be used as XYZ material, but we'll get into that later. At its very core, that's all there is to the XYZ summon. Now then, let's move on and tackle some of the less intuitive stuff for the rest of the video. Part 2. Overlay units. In our last segment, I mentioned that we'd get back to the whole overlay unit thing, so let's do that now. As we established earlier, whenever an XYZ monster is XYZ summoned, the monsters used for that summon tend to stick around. These monsters used for the XYZ summon are referred to as the XYZ material, but can also be called overlay units. The term overlay units is the term they use in the Zexal anime, and I kinda prefer to just calling them XYZ material. I don't know, I think it sounds cooler to me. But anyway, I digress. The important aspect of these overlay units is that they are primarily meant to represent how many times an XYZ monster can use a certain effect, and or meant to act almost as a maintenance cost of sort. Here are some examples. Typically, whenever an XYZ monster would use an effect, they would have to detach an overlay unit and send it directly to the graveyard, therefore letting you use whatever effect they were trying to use. We can see this in a card like number 39, Utopia. a monster that needs 2 level 4 monsters as material and has the effect to negate any attack by detaching one of its Xyz materials, meaning that under most circumstances, this effect can only ever be used twice, which is simple enough. Here's an example of how it can be used as a maintenance cost. Take a card such as Baguska the Terribly Tired Tapir. This monster has an active effect that changes all face-up monsters on the field to defense position and prevents them from activating their effects, which is pretty strong. However, in order to balance this, it has a maintenance cost that requires it to detach an Xyz material every single turn, thus allowing this effect to perspire for only 2 turns. Now that we understand how overlay units are used by Xyz monsters, we can move on to actually discussing what exactly happens to them whenever they're detached. Whenever an Xyz material is used up, it's usually sent to the graveyard, unless it's specified otherwise by a card effect like Shifter or Macro. However, something you might not know is that whenever a overlay unit is detached from an Xyz monster, it's not considered the same thing as leaving the field. At this moment, you might be looking at me with a blank stare as to what the hell I'm even talking about, and I don't blame you. Here's the thing, Xyz monsters are kind of weird when it comes to their overlay units, and here's why. An Xyz material currently attached to an Xyz monster is neither treated as a monster nor treated as being on field, and I believe one of the best ways I can illustrate this is with the monster known as Reborn Tengu, a really cool and interesting monster that has the effect to special summon another copy of itself whenever it leaves the field. Now then, this card would usually get its effect off if it were to be tributed for a summon, used as synchro material, used as ritual or fusion fodder while on field. Under most circumstances, this effect usually goes off, but things change whenever it's used as an Xyz material. If this monster were to be used as an Xyz material and then be detached by an effect, then the effect to special summon another copy of itself would not go off because Reborn Tengu was never technically on the field when detached. As I said, this is all because overlay units are, well, a little wacky and weird. But here's another example in order to solidify this whole idea. Take Salamangreat Spinny. I won't read the entire card since the only relevant part of this card is that it's able to special summon itself from the graveyard. But here's the thing, Spinny has a caveat in its effect that says if it leaves the field and goes to the graveyard, it's banished instead. But if you were to use Spinny as an Xyz material for an Xyz summon, and then were to detach it for an effect, it would then not register that last effect and just go to the graveyard, because it never left the field. Anyway, as I said, Xyz monsters are kinda weird with their whole overlay units thing. But as long as you remember that an Xyz material is neither treated as a monster and or as being on the field, then you should be good. But with that, we can move on to our next segment. Part 3. Variations of the Xyz summon. Usually, Xyz summons are fairly simple. As I said, typically an Xyz summon will require you to use 2 or more monsters of the same level to perform an Xyz summon, but there will be times when this won't be the case. Take the whole Zodiac archetype as an example. This is an Xyz based archetype that breaks the Xyz mechanic entirely by allowing all their Xyz monsters to be summoned using a single monster as material. More specifically, a single Zodiac monster, which is wild and explains why they were so dominant during their time. We also have cards like Dhampir Vampire Sheridan. I probably butchered that, but whatever. Which falls under a category of Xyz monsters that have a special effect that let them treat other monsters that don't fit their Xyz material requirements as if they did. I know that was a mouthful, but let me show you what I mean. This card has an effect while it's still in the extra deck, which is wild on its own. So here's how it works. If you were to take control of one of your opponent's monsters on their side of the field with a card like, I don't know, Change of Heart as an example, then that monster that you took control of would then be able to be treated as a level 6 monster in order to facilitate the summon of that Xyz monster. That's what I mean when I mentioned that. Here's another example of what we were trying to explain with the last monster, which is a lot simpler. Take Gigantic Sprite. This card can treat Link 2 monsters as if they were level 2 for the summon. As you can see, this card breaks the rules of the Xyz mechanic completely by using monsters that don't even have levels as material. As we can see from these 2 examples, the Xyz mechanic can vary quite a bit. Additionally, we also have Xyz monsters that can use other Xyz monsters on field as Xyz material. Take a card like Cyber Dragon Infinity. This card states that once per turn, you can also Xyz summon Cyber Dragon Infinity by using Cyber Dragon Nova you control as material. We also have a card like Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder. This card requires you to do a couple of steps before you can do this, but it reads, once per turn, if an Xyz monster battled this turn, you can also Xyz summon Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder by using one Xyz monster you control as material. As you can see, Divine Arsenal AA Zeus is able to properly special summon itself, but by breaking the rules. Our last example for this is going to be seen with Number F0 Utopic Future. This Xyz monster has us perform its Xyz summon by using any two Xyz monsters with the same rank, excluding number monsters. As we can see, this monster doesn't even behave as if it were an Xyz monster because it's having us use Xyz monsters as materials, and it doesn't specify levels or I guess ranks in this scenario. But anyway, in most cases, whenever an Xyz summon is performed using a single Xyz monster as material or multiple, the new Xyz monster will usually specify that the materials attached to the original Xyz monsters are transferred to the new Xyz monster. That was a mouthful, but in short, if you use multiple Xyz monsters as material, the materials attached to those original monsters will be usually attached to the new one. There we go. Alright, let's move on to our last segment of the day. Part 4. Effects to Xyz Summon. You might be sitting there confused right now since didn't we just finish covering the alternative ways to perform Xyz summons? Well, yes. But the difference between this segment and the last is that in the last segment we covered alternative ways to perform built-in Xyz summons, while in this one we'll be covering activated card effects that perform Xyz summons. Quick refresher in case you don't know the difference between a built-in summon versus an effect to summon. In short, effects to summon are special summons that are performed via activated card effects. These type of summons do start a chain and allow your opponent to react to the effect that summons that monster, instead of the special summon of the monster specific. This can be seen with cards like Yugioh Change, a quick play spell card that revives two Yugioh monsters in your graveyard and immediately performs an Xyz summon with them. In this example, we can see that the activation of the spell card leads to the special summon of the Xyz monster. But in addition, we also have the rank up spells. This is a series of spell cards that allow you to target an Xyz monster on your side of the field and either rank it up, which is the process of special summoning another Xyz monster of a higher rank than the selected monster, or rank it down, which is less common, but I'm sure you can guess what it is. It's the process of special summoning an Xyz monster of a lower rank than the one you control. Even though these cards do special summon an Xyz monster, they don't actually perform an Xyz summon, but instead treat the special summon of the Xyz monster as an Xyz summon. This is different compared to a card like Xyz Shift, that lets you tribute an Xyz monster you control to special summon another one from your extra deck. The special summon of this Xyz monster would not be classified as an Xyz summon because it did not meet the requirements for an Xyz summon, nor does the card indicate that it's being treated as one. This is an important detail to note because in the original two examples I gave in this segment, those two activated card effects performed Xyz summons, while in the last one with Xyz Shift does not properly summon the Xyz monster, which means that the monster summoned via the card of Xyz Shift won't be able to be revived if it were to be destroyed by battle, card effect, or banished, while the first two would be. So in short, if a card says it's performing an Xyz summon or it's treating a special summon as if it were an Xyz summon, you're golden. But if not, tread carefully. And that's the end of the video. I do hope you guys enjoyed your stay and learned something new, or at least understand the topic a little bit better. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. But if not, let me know in the comments below. Was there something I missed, or is there another topic you'd like me to cover more in depth in a future video? But with that, I've been your pal Topsy. Thank you so much for stopping by and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.